Will AI machines become conscious one day? Hello, I'm Ruan Rajapaksha. This is a question that has been asked in many quarters today, mostly due to this new program called ChatGPT, which can answer many questions. It would go through the internet and answer whatever the question you have asked. And not necessarily it's 100% accurate, and you could see it's running here. But anyway, it has been very effective and it has made a major revolution in AI. AI was not doing anything remarkable lately until this ChatGPT came along. So anyway, we are going to discuss the question, will AI machines become conscious one day? So basically, consciousness, as far as we know so far, belongs to biological brains. Humans, of course, conscious, and some consciousness could be attributed to animals as well. So let us first talk about the brain. That's where the consciousness that we know of exists. So the brain did not fall from the sky. It's evolved on this earth. So let us look at the evolution of the brain. So let's look at amoeba. The amoeba don't have a brain, but it acts like it has a brain. It stalks other smaller microorganisms and eats them, and it avoids bigger amoeba. So it acts like it has some thought process going on, but it's all done using chemical signals. And then we go to tardigrades. Tardigrades are much bigger than amoeba, but we still cannot see them with our naked eyes. And they have eyes, they have legs, they have stomachs, but they don't have a brain or any nervous system. And why do they have eyes if they don't have a brain? I think the eyes they call some kind of photoreceptor cells. So that when light falls onto it, it knows that light is in a certain direction. When you say knows, it doesn't have a brain. How does it know anything? So we are going to talk about tardigrades. And then the worms, of course, have a brain. And brain may have very little number of neurons, or neurons are the cells in the brain. But there are a lot of interconnections, billions of them. And the reptiles, of course, have very complex brain, different parts to them. And then the mammals have a much more complex brain than reptiles. Mammals have something called cerebral cortex that reptiles don't have. Most other parts reptiles and the mammals share. And interestingly, there is a reptilian parts, or called reptilian complex in mammals, which is not really exactly as reptiles, but it's there. And then we go to humans, and humans basically have a mammalian brain. We don't have any brain part that other mammals don't have. We may have brain parts to different proportions. So we would get some idea about the evolution of the brain, and then we could look at the brain today, the human brain today. The human brain is built using neurons. The building blocks of the human brain is neurons, nerve cells. And we start from the brain stem. Brain stem is the part of the brain that is attached to the spinal cord. And the brain stem has medulla and pons, two parts. And these parts basically controls heart rhythm, the muscles that we inside our brain, inside our body, that we have no control of. The consciousness does not have any control of these. Probably I cannot control how my heart muscles contract and expand. So brainstem is unconscious part of the brain. And then we go to midbrain, and midbrain have hippocampus and amygdala and areas like that, which is responsible for memory and emotions. And then we go to cerebella. Cerebella is in back of our heads, and this controls when we are walking or when we are doing something that is not conscious. The cerebella would take over. And it's again has no consciousness or that we can think of. And then we go to cerebral cortex. That's where the consciousness lies. And it's not very clear how the consciousness get generated in the cerebral cortex. But this is the area that we believe that whatever the process that happens gives rise to consciousness occurs. And then we go to neuronal gene expression. Now these neurons don't act on its own. Genes in those neuronal cells get expressed depending upon the chemical environment. And when these neurons gene gets expressed, proteins would be made and neurons would act in a certain way. So we would look into that part and we would see how that part, neuronal gene expression, affect the brain function. So once we do these things, we have some idea about the brain, and then we can go to the mathematics of the brain. Is the brain a Turing machine? And what is a Turing machine? Alan Turing, one of the pioneers of computers, thought that all machines, all computers, can be emulated with a very simple machine that he came forward with. That is, in this simple machine, it can go to the right, it can go to the left, it could erase a number or it could write a number. Only those 4 operations. And this very simple machine can be used to emulate any complex computer today. And he proved that mathematically. So are all computers Turing machines? The answer is yes. All computers, whether it's a supercomputer, whether it's a GPU unit, they're all Turing machines. And Turing found that these machines have a problem called halting problem. They don't halt sometimes when it goes to a certain situation. So that is called the Turing machines halting problem. So we are going to discuss that. Now we are talking about quantum computers. Are quantum computers Turing machines? Now that the jury is out there, and some people say yes they are, some people say they are not, because there is superposition of particles are involved. Now we have to go to Gödel's incompleteness theorem. What is Gödel's incompleteness theorem? David Hilbert, thought that all the formulas that are true can be proved using axioms and the rules. This is what he thought, David Hilbert, and he started to make an encyclopedia for arithmetic, where all the arithmetical formulas that he wanted to put in an encyclopedia and the proofs of it. But Kurt Gödel showed that there could be true statements, mathematically true statements that cannot be proven. So there are, in any system with axioms and rules, there would be true statements outside the area that we can prove. So this was very interesting. And this idea was used by John Lucas, and he came up with a thesis where he says that Kurt Gödel's idea that will not apply to human brain. In other words, human brain is not a machine that follow the Gödelian logic. But then there was this problem of Turing's halting problem, and they seems to be the same thing. Turing's machine halting problem of the Turing machine and the Gödel's incompleteness theorem are basically the 2 different sides of the same coin. So now people started to think. So there are theories of consciousness that I will discuss few of them. And Francis Crick, Nobel Prize winner in molecular biology, and he thought that there is some kind of a wave or wavelength or certain frequency in neurons. And when that frequency is attained, consciousness would arise. I don't think there's any evidence for that. And the Roger Penrose came up with the idea of microtubules. And these microtubules inside neurons have quantum processes, as per him. And he thought these quantum processes gives rise to our consciousness. And then John Searle is a philosopher. He talks about qualia. When you see red, you feel red. The color red is felt in your brain and in your mind. And that's he called qualia. And that's not being experienced by a machine, as per him. And then Daniel Dennett believed that's not the case. When a computer sees red, it would generate a number. And similarly, human brain also creates certain neuronal pathways or firing, and that could be represented with a number. And that's what the Dennett says. And then Marvin Minsky talks about the society of mind. All these parts of the brain acting together and coming up together in like a society of carpenters and the policemen and people, the teachers, students, and then eventually some kind of consciousness emerge. And then in the case of Buddha, he had 6 types of consciousness, which we call Shadvinyana. And this consciousness didn't act on its own. It has to be with other items, which he called Panchaskandha, 5 items that he talked about. So we will discuss all that. And now, so by then, we have talked about the evolution of the brain from amoeba to humans. And then we talked about the human brain, brain stem, midbrain, gene expression, all that. And then we have talked about the mathematics of the brain, whether it's a Turing machine and Gödel's incompleteness theorem, Lucas' thesis. And now we are ready to talk about artificial intelligence. How did the AI came about? First, it starts with the perceptron, one neuron type. And then artificial neural network came about. Now, is artificial neural network somewhat similar to the neural network in the brain? We will discuss. There's something called backpropagation in ANN. Do we have backpropagation in the brain? And then CNN is the convolution neural network. And we are going to discuss whether this type of process appearing in the brain. RNN is the recurrent neural network, and LSTM is the long short-term memory. And then you have attention mechanism, encoder-decoder architecture, and the transformers. All these things came about gradually starting from perceptron. The perceptron can be considered as the amoeba of AI. That's the start. And then you could have expert systems and the graphs or AI graphs, etc. But anyway, if you take one item like encoder-decoder, can we find a process in the brain that would be congruent with encoder and decoder architecture? So we will discuss that type of thing in chapter 7. So once we have the idea of AI, then we could discuss similarities and differences between artificial intelligence and the brain. So once we do that, then we are ready to answer the question, can artificial intelligence be conscious one day? Because we could look at the AI part, we could look at an encoder and a decoder, for an example, and we could look at the brainstem or the cerebral cortex and say, is there any process that emulate encoder or decoder in the brain? That type of conversation we could do. And I think it would be a very interesting discussion. And I hope you would be with me for the journey. Thanks a lot for listening.